African folktales expose father's deepest fears. Everything changed the day the drum spoke. It was the day the great chief Amrin realized his deepest fear. His son would betray him. The village was silent. The sky was dark, and in the middle of the gathering, the sacred talking drum echoed a terrifying prophecy. A son will rise against his father. A kingdom will fall. Blood will flow. The people gasped. Chief Amrin's heart stopped. He turned to his only son, Adairo, a boy of just 13. Could this child, his own flesh and blood, one day betray him? The boy's eyes were wide with fear. But Amrin felt something else. A warning, a whisper from the ancestors. Be careful. The prophecy never lies. And from that moment, the chief never trusted his son again. It started with small things. Amrin no longer let Adairo sit beside him during meetings. He stopped teaching him the ways of the warriors. When the boy asked, "Father, what have I done?" the chief would only say, "I am protecting us both." But deep inside, he was afraid. The prophecy never said when the betrayal would come. It never said how. Every time Adairo spoke, laughed, or learned something new, Amrin's heart ached. Would this be the boy who destroyed him? Would his own blood be his downfall? One night, Amrin had a dream. He was standing in the middle of the village. His son was in front of him, holding a knife. The people shouted. The earth shook, and then Adairo plunged the knife into his chest. Amrin woke up gasping for air. His body was covered in sweat. The prophecy. Was it about to happen? He couldn't take the risk. Something had to be done. At sunrise, Amrin gathered his warriors. He pointed at his son and said something that made the whole village freeze. Take him to the forest. Leave him there. He must never return. Adairo gasped, "Father, please." But Amrin looked away. The warriors grabbed the boy. The villagers whispered in shock. The boy screamed for his father. But Chief Amrin didn't move. Didn't look back. Because deep down, he believed he had just saved himself. Adairo was dragged into the deep forest. The warriors left him alone, afraid, hungry, lost. But as he sat beneath an ancient tree, crying for a father who had thrown him away, a shadow moved. Something watched him. A deep, dark voice whispered, "The gods have been waiting for you, child." Adairo froze. His story was only beginning. Adairo's breath caught in his throat. He turned slowly, his heart pounding. The voice had come from the shadows of the trees, but no one was there. The wind whispered. The leaves shook, and then a figure stepped forward, tall, covered in black feathers, eyes glowing like the full moon. It was an elder spirit. Adairo's mouth went dry. Everyone in the village had heard the stories. The elder spirits only appear to those who are destined for something great, or something terrible. The spirit tilted its head. "Your father fears you." Adairo clenched his fists. "He threw me away." The spirit nodded slowly. "Because of the prophecy." Adairo's body shook with anger. His own father had believed the words of a talking drum over his own son. Now, he was alone, abandoned. Or was he? The spirit took a step closer. "What if I told you? You were meant to be here?" Adairo's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The spirit's voice was deep, powerful. "Your father made a mistake, and soon he will beg for you to return." Adairo froze. His father? Begging? It sounded impossible. But something in the spirit's tone sent chills down his spine. And then the wind shifted. The ground rumbled. And suddenly, Adairo felt something deep inside him. Awaken. A force he had never felt before. It was as if the earth itself was speaking to him, calling him. Adairo stumbled back. What's happening to me? The spirit smiled. You are the child of the prophecy, Adiro. The boy's heart stopped. The prophecy. The one his father had feared. The one that had ruined his life. Adiro clenched his fists. Then maybe the prophecy was right. The spirit's eyes glowed. Yes. And now you must decide. Will you return as a savior? Or as a curse? Adiro's heart pounded. The village had betrayed him. His father had abandoned him. And now he had a choice. A dangerous choice. Would he go back and save the people who had thrown him away? Or would he return with vengeance? The wind howled. The trees shook, and deep in his chest, Adiro felt the power growing. He was no longer the same boy who had been left in the forest. When he returned, the entire kingdom would know his name. The night was silent. Adiro stood in the middle of the dark forest, his heart pounding. His father had cast him away. His people had abandoned him, and now he had a choice. Would he return to the village as a savior, or as a curse? The elder spirit's glowing eyes locked onto his. You are ready. Adiro swallowed hard. Ready for what? The spirit's voice was calm. To take back what was stolen from you. Adiro's fists tightened. His father had stolen his future, his home, his place among the warriors, his trust. But no more. The spirit raised a hand. The ground beneath Adiro shook. From the earth, 3 shadows rose, tall, menacing, cloaked in darkness. If you are truly the child of the prophecy, the spirit said, you will defeat them. Adiro took a step back. But I don't know how to fight spirits. The spirit's voice was sharp. Your father feared your strength. Now prove that he was right to be afraid. Adiro's breath came fast. The first shadow lunged. Adiro jumped aside, barely dodging its claws. The second one struck, its long fingers reaching for his throat. Adiro ducked. Rolled. The third shadow loomed over him, twice his size. Adiro had no weapons, no training, nothing. But then, something inside him awoke, a deep power. Ancient. Wild. Untamed. The wind roared around him. His veins burned with energy. Without thinking, Adiro raised his hand, and the ground erupted beneath him. The shadows screamed. A wave of force sent them flying back into the darkness. And then they were gone. Adiro stood there shaking. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His hands were glowing. He had never felt this alive. The elder spirit watched him, a slow smile forming. Now you understand. Adiro swallowed. What? What am I? The spirit's eyes burned. A king in the making. Chief Amrin sat on his throne, restless. Something was wrong. For days, the village had been plagued with bad omens. The rivers dried. The sky turned red at sunset. And worst of all, his dreams. Every night, he saw the same vision, a boy standing at the edge of the village. Eyes glowing, power swirling around him, and then, the boy raised his hand. And the kingdom crumbled. Amrin woke up gasping. The prophecy. Had he made a mistake? Had he sent his own son away, only to create his greatest enemy? Fear gripped his heart. And for the first time, Chief Amrin realized his deepest fear was coming true. Adiro was coming back. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The wind howled through the forest. Adiro stood still, his heart racing. The elder spirit's words echoed in his mind. A king in the making. He had felt the power. He had defeated the shadows. But now, it was time to face his past. The village that abandoned him. The father who feared him. The prophecy that changed his life. Adiro stepped forward. Every leaf that crunched under his feet felt like a warning. The spirits of the forest whispered as he passed. He is coming. The boy with the power. The prophecy has awakened. The village was close now. He could hear the faint sounds of drums in the distance, could smell the smoke of burning firewood. His fists clenched. Would they even recognize him? Would they beg for his forgiveness? Or would they fear him more than ever? Chief Amrin sat in his hut, staring at the fire. His mind was heavy with thoughts. For the first time in years, he was afraid. His dreams had shown him a boy with glowing eyes, a boy filled with power, a boy he had abandoned, and now, the village whispered, the hunters claimed to have seen a shadow in the forest. The elders spoke of an ancient force returning. The prophecy was unfolding, and Amrin knew the truth. His son was coming back. But would he come as a son? Or as a curse? As the sun began to set, a strange wind blew through the village. The flames in the fire pits flickered. The animals cried out, and then the sky darkened. A thick mist rolled in from the trees. People gathered in fear. Something was coming. Amrin stepped outside, his heart pounding, and there, at the entrance of the village, stood a Dairo, tall, stronger, eyes burning with an untamed power. The villagers gasped. They knew who he was, the boy who was cast away, the son of the chief, the child of the prophecy. Amrin's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he saw the truth. His deepest fear had come to life. A Dairo had returned. But the real question was, had he come for forgiveness or for vengeance? The village was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on a Dairo, the boy who had been cast away, the boy who was now a man with power in his veins. Chief Amrin swallowed hard. His heart pounded as he took a step forward. A Dairo. His voice was barely a whisper. But a Dairo did not speak. His eyes burned like fire under the night sky. The wind around him swirled. The villagers stepped back in fear. They had abandoned him, betrayed him, and now he had returned. But for what? Would he forgive? Or would he destroy? Amrin's lips trembled. He had spent years running from this moment, years convincing himself that he had done the right thing. But looking at his son now, he knew he had made a terrible mistake. A Dairo was never the curse. He was the blessing they had rejected. And now, that blessing had returned, with a force greater than anything they had ever seen. The tension in the air was thick. The villagers held their breath. And then, finally, a Dairo spoke. Father. His voice was deep, strong, unshaken. Amrin flinched at the word. It was the first time in years that a Dairo had called him that. But was it in love, or in hatred? Amrin took another step forward. My son, I. But before he could finish, the ground shook beneath them. Boom! A crack split the earth near a Dairo's feet. The villagers screamed. A powerful force had awakened, and at that moment, Amrin knew. This was not just a reunion. It was a reckoning. The ground trembled. The villagers screamed as cracks spread across the earth like veins of fire. Chief Amrin staggered back, his heart pounding. A Dairo! Stop this! He shouted. But a Dairo's eyes glowed brighter. The wind around him roared like a mighty river. The power inside him had been buried for too long. Now, it was awake, and it could no longer be controlled. A sudden flash of light erupted from a Dairo's hands. The flames in the village torches rose higher. The sky darkened. It was as if the gods themselves had arrived to watch. The elders fell to their knees. The prophecy. They whispered, "It is happening." Amrin's chest tightened. This was his fault. He had cast his own son away. He had let fear control him. And now, that fear had come to life. A Dairo took a step forward. The villager stepped back. His power was unstoppable. Would he burn down the village? Would he spare them? No one knew. Not even Adairo himself? Then, a voice cut through the chaos. "Brother!" Everyone turned. A young girl ran forward. Her hair was wild. Her feet were bare. Her eyes full of tears. It was Lena, Adairo's little sister. She had been only a baby when he was cast away. But now, she was standing before him, not in fear, but in love. She stretched her hands towards him. "Come home, Adairo." The power around him flickered. The wind slowed. His glowing hands trembled. For the first time since his return, he hesitated. Would he let go of his anger, or had it consumed him forever? The village held its breath, waiting, hoping, fearing, and then Adairo lifted his hands one last time. And what happened next? No one saw coming. The village was silent. The wind had stopped howling. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Adairo's hands were still raised, glowing with the power that had once been his curse. But now, as he looked at Lena, his little sister, the only one who saw him as family, his heart wavered. Would he unleash his wrath and let the village feel his pain? Or would he forgive and rewrite the prophecy? Amrin watched his son closely. His lips trembled, but he didn't speak. Because he knew this was not his moment to decide. This was Adairo's fate to choose. Adairo clenched his fists. A bright flash erupted from his body, shaking the ground one last time. The villagers screamed, shielding their faces. Amrin shut his eyes, expecting the worst. And then silence. The ground stopped shaking. The wind became still. The fire dimmed. When Amrin slowly opened his eyes, Adairo's power was gone. His hands were no longer glowing. His eyes, once filled with rage, were now filled with tears. He had made his choice. He had chosen mercy. Amrin did not hesitate. He dropped to his knees before his son. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Adairo, my son, I have failed you." The village gasped. Their mighty chief, begging for forgiveness, but Amrin didn't care. He had wronged his son, and now the whole world knew it. Tears streamed down his face. "If I could take back my mistakes, I would. But I can't. All I can do is ask, will you forgive me?" Adairo's breath was shaky. This was the man who abandoned him. The man who feared him. But now, he saw him as just a father. A father who was afraid. A father who had made mistakes. And for the first time, Adairo saw the truth. He wasn't the only one suffering. His father had lived with this guilt for years. He had been a prisoner of his own fear. Adairo looked at Lena, still standing beside him, then at the villagers, who had once seen him as a monster, and finally, at his father. He took a deep breath, and then, he bent down and placed his hand on Amrin's shoulder. The chief looked up, his eyes full of hope, and Adairo whispered 2 words, "I forgive." At that moment, the prophecy was broken. Adairo had been feared as a curse, but in the end, he was the village's greatest blessing. And with that, Adairo stepped forward, not as a monster, not as an outcast, but as the son of the village. And for the first time in his life, he was finally home.